go. G'day and welcome to another episode of SPCs Unleashed. We had a few in a row at the start of the year and then life got in the way and we've been missing for a couple of weeks. Either that or tonight's topic was so scary we decided we needed 3 weeks to prepare for it instead of one. Because tonight we are going to tackle one of the most confusing things SAFe talks about. Well, that's what my clients tell me anyway. So we are in the capable hands of Stephan Neck, who is going to take us into the world of the dual operating system. Over to you, Stephan.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, dealing with the dual operating model or dual operating system has two sides, right? It's the model, the system, and dealing with it. So what's the challenge? We have a dynamic network of people focused on changing the business. It's about change. And there's the run state, right, where you have a stable functional hierarchy focused on operating and growing a successful and sustainable business. And you have to adhere to legal stuff. You have to be profitable. Otherwise, you run out of money. Where there's no cash, there's no business. So how do we deal with operating in a simultaneous way? How do we increase one of the core competencies, organizational agility, right? Faster response, innovation, disrupting states, all that comes together. And it's a people business. It's people doing the work. They have to do decision making. And now within this field of tension, how can we really assure that we have better customer focus, that we have really a good response time? So let's talk about those two sides of the coin. And if I say coin, I mean, what is a viable system for an enterprise performance? And I tried to frame that a little bit for this session. And now back to my mates. Let me hear your initial thoughts or share first insights based on your experience with the dual operating model. Who would like to pick up the talking stick? Niko, go for it.
I'm happy we're starting with no bashing. That's a cool start. For me, I'm always surprised when people take it too seriously. For me, it's just a change management trick. You need a dual operating system to make some concepts clear, and that helps you start. It's really a concept to start. It's not something to believe in it and to install it. It is a change management trick, so you can start with things that are important for you, and that's the flow, and it's the network. And it helps you starting with that instead of changing the whole organization.
So
that sounds interesting.
Mark, I'm curious, Niko, right? Starting with, right? What do you do once you've started? Do you still need it? Do you not need it? Do you live in a pure network and forget about the hierarchy?
No. As a hierarchy, it's really an important part because you have parts in the hierarchy which you will never have in the network. So, for instance, people development. Let's go back. When I started with Scrum, there were a fraction of people saying you don't need any hierarchies anymore. The team can do everything self-managed and everything is perfect. And I never believed that because developing a career or moving your skills is always something outside the system you are in. So if I as a Niko decide I don't want to be a developer anymore, I want to be a Scrum Master, a coach or whatever, the Scrum team will say, I don't need you. I need you as a developer. So you never have the chance to develop yourself. So you will always need some kind of a hierarchy or at least the skills that are in the hierarchy. And it was never in my case in the network. So what do I do was the question with the hierarchy. I will start changing them too, but I don't tell them in the beginning.
So the thing that just jumped out to me when you said dual operating systems useful in the beginning, right, is I'm like, well, what do you do after the beginning? What makes the dual operating system no longer relevant?
So what really happens is after a half year, 9 months, people are realizing the hierarchy needs also a change. But then I have the capacity also to see how can I change or bring the hierarchy in a different mode. But the let's call it the lie of the dual operating system, telling them I will not touch you gives me the chance to be faster with my network. So I will start doing also change management on this part, on the hierarchy part too. But I don't start with that, because when I start with welcome, I will change the whole company, I can just go take the next door and go out again.
Interesting discussion. That's why I love my mates, right? So probably over to you, Ali. I saw in your notes some interesting aspects, and I'm sure Mark will poke some holes as well.
Oh, yes. I've, the dual operating system has kept me awake for very often, because it gives a name to a challenge that I think everyone faces whenever we're talking about agile at scale, whenever we're talking about safe, or whenever we talk about just having a lot of agile teams. The agile teams themselves, especially whenever we have a small little company like a startup, a team might be the entire company. And therefore, there is less of a need for standardization and, having rules in place for how to recruit people and ways to perform end year reviews and so forth and so forth. But that's whenever we talk about a company that is 10 or 15 people in size. But what if we have a company that is 10,000 or 15,000 people in size? Then you need certain skills and capabilities as a company to be able to run the company sustainably, to have some agreements over the different departments or divisions or business lines. And the thing is, with agile transformations, with implementing SAFe and that becoming sort of the standard for the network organization, how we call it, there's just a lot of topics that we typically do not talk about. We love these iterations. We love these short, these short cycles, quick integration, and all of that stuff. Stable teams, with all kind of engineering disciplines and competencies all in one team. But then, how are we going to make sure that all of the, test professionals in the different teams are aligned with each other, that they can learn from one another over the entire sort of horizontal axis of the organization? That doesn't happen automatically. And I've learned over the time that, we're it's very simple to say, well, the team will figure it out. That is true whenever you have a startup, but whenever you have a huge company, there's just a lot of additional processes and additional, things to think about, and just dumping all of that onto teams is a huge and over the top amount of cognitive load that they then also need to think about and also need to organize. So the dual operating system and the topics that I'm going to talk about is really, I think, the biggest challenge that an SPC will go through, because it goes beyond just this, starting agile teams, helping them out, and scrum masters and product owners, and then a train and the first PI planning. It goes way further than that. It's really embedding that type of concept into the big and nasty and sometimes difficult and chaotic and sometimes bureaucratic context of, an enterprise.
Interesting curveball you threw, Ali. And I had the opportunity this week to talk to leaders at the university in an executive master course. And when I came into that room, already some people were in there. They had hoodies on from the university. And if they turned their back, on the back, it was leading change. And I started the lecture with, guys, what are we talking about today? And they looked at me, looked on the program and said, yeah, we're talking about a secondary organization that helps us change how we act now and how we will be future-proof. And I said, okay, how would you summarize that in the shortest possible sentence? And there was silence in the room. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys stood up, turned his back towards me and said, here it is, leading change, right? So interesting stuff when it comes to the two sides of this coin of the dual operating system. Mark, your initial thoughts about this topic?
So I got to be honest. when the dual operating system slides came into SAFe, and I can't remember, like it was like SAFe 5 maybe.
Mm.
I saw those slides and I went, finally, we've got a great way to talk about this, right? Because if you think about the problems we've been talking about, they've existed as long as Agile's existed. Because Agile says create cross-functional teams, and you instantly have a clash between the hierarchy where people are, line managed by somebody who's in their discipline, and then you're putting them together in teams who have a day-to-day focus based on their mission. So it's an old problem. And, there's always the interesting things you've got to lean into, right? What happens to the traditional leaders? What's the job they've got to do? How do you look after people's need for craft and to be able to talk to people like them? And the dual operating system came along and went, oh, what a beautiful, elegant way of solving the problem. And then I looked a little bit deeper and went, okay, what do you practically do with it? It's really cool to have these diagrams. I had a problem because if I was talking to non-technical people, the idea of a dual operating system didn't resonate for them. They couldn't. I remember dual booting between OS2 and Windows many, many years ago, right? But it felt good. And I looked at SAFe and I went, what do you do with this practically? Yeah, that wasn't there, right? And then I went, I'll go read the Cotter book, right? Because that'll explain to me what you do with this. And I read the Cotter book and I went, well, that doesn't really look like SAFe, right? To me, my summary of the Cotter book was like, here's how you motivate people to share focus with the work they do on the side of their desk. So, have you got an issue that says, I've got these kind of two parallel ways of working? Yes. For me, it kind of distills down to, and coming back to a viable system for enterprise performance, right? People need clarity. Fundamentally, any of these operating models will generally mean you wind up with two bosses, right? And whether or not you think of them as, I work for my Scrum Master, and if I say, well, I work for my Scrum Master, then every Scrum coach out there is going to go boo hiss. Yeah, that's the you don't work for a Scrum Master. They're meant to be a servant leader, right? Well, do I work for my product owner? And most Agile people will say, no, you don't work for your product owner. Do I work for my boss? Well, my boss isn't meant to be giving, just humanity for people on the ground is to go, if I potentially, when I turn up to work, have multiple bosses, how do I know what to expect from them? And by the same token, for the leaders in the organization, if they're living in this world where they're potentially leading people who perceive themselves as having multiple bosses, how do you give them the clarity themselves to understand the way they need to adapt their leadership style to live in this duality?
But the cool thing is, with SAFe, we realized there is something we have to do, even if it doesn't give us enough tools and enough recipes, or no recipe. At least you're aware of the situation, and that's why I always say, if you want to continue as an SPC, the next thing for me, in my opinion, is becoming a systemic coach or becoming an organizational developer, which is outside SAFe. And at least these slides give us the awareness that it's more than just doing Scrum, doing SAFe, doing whatever. It's something around us. It's a system.
That's interesting. That's why I like my mates. They already took over the moderation. Because if you listen carefully, we're talking about how do we create a viable system that runs the business and grows the business, right? So listening to Mark, it's about clarity. Because if you just throw in the dual operating system to change agents, and even if it's a framework, it's not a recipe, it's a framework, but you should have some frame. You should have some guidance how to operate that, because it's called an operating system, right? And if I don't know how to operate some stuff, how can I change an organization, right? So throwing back the talking stick to you guys, if you think about, and now we might combine two things. We have a challenge getting a viable system for enterprise performance, run the business, grow the business. And what are the really big challenges we face with that dual operating system being in the framework? And let's be honest as well. What works, what doesn't work. So between those two questions, having something that really works is viable, and challenge is let's open the table. Let's lay it on the table. Ali, you're nodding with your head.
Yes, let me just deep dive in what I think in the past I've had a moment where I called this the ticking time bomb, which basically means if you don't do anything, this is gonna explode. Why? Because whenever we talk about agile teams, agile release trains, we're talking about self-organizing structures, and they've been very successful for very long. That's why we have this podcast. Even that's why I have a job. It has proven to help people and organizations to work together in delivering cool stuff, new products, new services out there in the market, and maintaining them for a very long period of time. It works, and it has been working forever. However, whenever we only focus on product owners, scrum masters, agile teams, PI planning and inspect and adapt, that kind of stuff, story points and whatever, we're missing the other half of the company. We're missing the part of the company that has been there in operating the company. And it would be very foolish to say that, well, we can ignore that, things will change automatically and people adapt and so forth. And it's in my experience, that is just simply not true. Going into an agile governance model, if I call it like that, takes away responsibilities that were typically part of certain roles. Line management. In the past, I've been working with teams that were calling themselves resource managers. They're not bad people. As a matter of fact, they were some of the most loving people that really took care of their people, of their own engineers, their direct reports. And whenever we have stable teams, whether it is stable agile teams or agile release trains or whatever, then, well, we don't have to do anything about resourcing anymore because people are part of teams and it's a stable team for a long period of time. Sure, there's some competence development. People might grow into a role or grow into, have career opportunities to do something else somewhere else in another train or another department. But, maintaining overview on that and remaining in control of that is a skill in itself. And I haven't been able to see or find good examples in which everything, including the transfer of people, career development, end year reviews, and that kind of stuff, performance management, if you'd call it like that, that it's done by the team members themselves. It is something that needs to be managed, and therefore, that means that the role of the so-called resource manager or the line management changes. And not having an answer for them or working with them to be as effective as possible in this new world with agile release trains and agile teams and so forth, it's a recipe for disaster. And hence, this was, as Mark mentioned, I think was a good opportunity to open up that discussion and finding ways to involve line management and all of the organizational structures to keep the hierarchy stable, keep the organization stable, to involve them into the change and understand what their role is in increasing the agility of product development in the organization. And it's just not doing that. It's again a recipe for disaster.
And what I like when I listen to you, Ali, is there are so many interests in a company, and we cannot anything fulfill in the network. So you said about growing people. It's also one of my examples there. So if you want to have a proper career, you need this element. It's usually not in the train or in the team. Going back to your question, Stephan, you have on the one side, you need to be fast. You need to be able to organize and reorganize. And this reorganization, doing the right things, right things fast is important. But if you do only things fast, you need some kind of hygiene. And this hygiene part is, in my case, in the hierarchy part, because they are doing it more efficiently. They care for hygiene. And I also have in my trainings an example which is a little bit scary why I need hierarchy. And the topic is sexual harassment. You cannot let a team solve themselves sexual harassment. You will need hierarchy for that. So don't tell me you let victims and aggressors being together in one room and say solve it yourself because you're agile. It will not work. So for all those who said, "Oh, what Ollie is saying is now fluffy things. You can do anything in the value stream." No, you can't. You need hierarchy. You need hygiene. You need efficiency, and that's all in the other part. That's why I need both coins, both sides of the coins.
And I think you summarized it nicely. Principle number 10, organize and reorganize around value. Sounds organization doesn't happen magically. We need leadership in there. Let's turn our focus towards what are then the biggest challenges you faced in the past with the dual operating model or system. Who would like to start?
I'm gonna jump in here. And I think it's probably the best way for me to start is to go, who was I in the beginning of my agile journey, which is probably what fed these challenges, right? Because in the beginning of my agile journey, right, what was Scrum? Scrum was you don't need managers anymore. And as a young, typical developer, my life sounded great. And then I went and I got my Scrum training in America, and they went, there's no team roles anymore, right? You identify as a team member. So there's no hierarchy, there's no team roles. It's just people turn up and do what the team needs. And you know, as a young, highly technical person who'd never really cared for the process side of life, this was a panacea to me. It was like a world with less managers slowing us down from building good software. And it was like my early agile days were pushing management out of the way to go, just get out of the way and let the team get on with the job. Stop doing this, stop doing this, stop doing this. And I think a lot of agile coaches do the same thing. It's like, just push the managers away, let the team do it. But there's a truth that says, well, those managers, they're really skilled people, right? Who've got a lot of value to offer. And it's very easy to say, stop doing all of this stuff, right? As opposed to going, actually, if you look at it in a positive way, what are the things you should start focusing on? Because if you actually look in a traditional model, before you start playing with the dual operating system, the role of a manager is a really challenging one, because it's not just make sure your people are doing the right thing. It's make sure your people are safe, make sure they have career paths, make sure they're feeling challenged and having opportunities to grow. The list goes on and on and on in terms of your responsibilities to those you lead, your responsibilities to the organization on behalf of those you lead, and getting work done, right? And most leaders, particularly in the kind of junior to middle management, have spent so much of their life drowning in just keeping the lights on that they've never had and you speak to most of them and go, oh, I know I should be doing more one-on-ones. I know I should be focusing more on career development. I know I should be. And there's a whole bunch of things they know they should have been doing, but they haven't had time for. And then all of a sudden we go, actually, all this stuff that's been really time consuming for you your entire career as a leader, you leave that to the Scrum Masters and product owners and teams. You've now got time to do all these things that you know you should have been doing all along. But the truth is, has anybody developed their capability to do that? And you suddenly get somebody who, they haven't built the skill to be a purely hierarchy leader with the day-to-day running of the business being done elsewhere. And there's not a lot of agile people out there who'll go out and offer you training in how to do that. In actual fact, an awful lot of the agile people are out there will say, well, management's evil. So not only won't they help you build the skills, but they'll get in the way of it. And that for me, I think it's doing the leadership development to actually let the new world work well and to support your leaders in growing into their new spaces. For me, that's one of the biggest challenges that you've got to face into.
What I love when you listen to Mark is you have to start thinking. How many times, dear audience, I imagine you've been Scrum Masters or coaches on Scrum level, on Kanban or whatever. How many times you just went with the flow? We just do it because you do it. And to be honest, long time Agile was on the bigger side of power, because you do it Agile. Agile is important. Management is bad. Leadership is the right word. Managers are the bad guys who they hurt people, and leaders are leading people, and you just go with the vocabulary without thinking. And I think if you work with the dual operating system, you should start think again. What is the purpose of what you're doing? And exactly, management isn't something evil. It's really important skills where we have there. You work with people, and sometimes I really got sick by listening to the other coaches just repeating vocabulary. So really, I love you guys to listen to you, because it really makes you think about what we try to achieve here. What was the question? Sorry.
You're right. The question is, what's the biggest challenges you faced?
Exactly.
You just mentioned it. That's good. That's good. That's good.
Thank you. And for me, one challenge I always had with the dual operating system were people thinking, now I have to install it, and now I have to live it forever. And as I said in the beginning, for me, it's just the start. And the biggest challenge was to say it's not something like the new operating system. You have to do an update on your organization and install it, and then it's your solution. It's just a vehicle or a starting point. That was my biggest challenge. Thank you, Stephan, for reminding me again.
May I pick up what you just said, Niko? And I've seen that over and over again. People try to find a solution to install something, and if you look closely, it's the line organization. They try to immediately kind of fix how we are organized. The question is, do the customers, do the markets care about that? No, they have triggers for us, and they want value increments, right? They don't care. And I recently joined a training where we talked about some basics of organizing the enterprise or entities. And we went through a overview. If you start with a startup, it is very integral. A few people know what they do. They churn out value increments so they stay alive. And then it gets too big, right? All of a sudden, too many people, crisis of fragmentation. And you try to create something like this line organization in a functional way, right? And over the time, when you look at how you create value, there's a crisis of responsibility. Oh, developers should have done a better job, so we can do a good job in testing, right? Or logistics says, guys, what crap do you deliver? We can't ship that, right? And what then happened, and you guys mentioned it, this famous matrix appears out of the blue, right? And we have crossing points, crisis of coordination again. Is it now my line manager? Is it change? What is it, right? And we always try to fix that over the line organization. And if it gets even bigger, we create huge divisions. You have groups of business units, and then the crisis of steering. And now we come up with the dual operating system where we say, hey, it's a network. Find your way, right? Collaborate, coordinate. But if you have a huge network, and that's what I face now and then, is people tell me, hey, where's my home? Where do I belong to? It's an identity crisis. So biggest challenge for me is we try to fix something that shouldn't be fixed by organizational units or forms of how you organize that. It's more like something else that we should bring in. That's my 5 cents to this topic. Ali, biggest challenges.
Yes. And my 5 cents is the fact that we remain so fluffy about it. It's if I mean, imagine you're a line manager, you have the formal responsibility for the well-being and the development of 20 people. Okay, those 20 people have a career, they have standards to adhere to, they have needs, and All of that needs to be taken into account. And then all of a sudden we have an agile transformation and we say, you know what, yeah, figure it out. Those agile teams or whatever, yeah, we will organize trainings for them, and the rest, you figure it out. It's unfair. It's unfair to these people. So my challenge is the fluffiness. What I think is required is clarity. Clarity such as a train will reserve 10% of its capacity for competence development, which basically means it's not just enablers or technical enablers. No, we need to spend or at least reserve about 10% of the capacity of the train to be able to become a better organization. And therefore, the line manager is an actual stakeholder of the train to think along on how to align the train with all kind of organizational structures and whatever, and make sure that the train is up to date with respect to policies and so forth and so forth. How they're going to do that, that's completely contextual, but I think we need to become way more sharp in the guidance, the responsibilities on how the hierarchical part of the dual operating system works. I think that's my biggest challenge.
And I
Right.
personally think
Oh,
what we
sorry, go ahead,
also
Niko.
have to do. Oh, sorry, Mark.
No, you go.
What I also personally think what we have to do is educate people more. So this whole series is called Unleash SPCs, but we have also unleash them and bring them, let them learn new tricks. And I think maybe it's a completely new podcast about that. So it's really more than just unleash. It's really learn new stuff, and that's why I think personally, as an SPC, my advice would be go around, make your community of practices, talk with people who are change managers or coaches or organizational developers, because it's a new discipline not covered in SAFe. Sorry, Mark.
I was going to probe, right? Because the 10% or carving time out for people who are, and let's be honest, right? In the dual operating system, you'll have people who don't exist in the network. You'll have people who only exist in the network. You'll have people who kind of exist in both. But if you think about the people who live in both and going, here, we're going to give you 10% to focus on, your hierarchy world, perhaps it's your craft development standards. That's been an old trick we've all used for years and years and years. And the interesting thing was always going, well, what's 10% really, right? Is 10% guesswork and you trust everybody to be well-behaved and self-manage it? Is 10% you've got some way of tracking it? And, I saw a lot of people try a lot of different experiments back in the days when we actually worked together as opposed to everybody working remotely. And I've seen that, really common thing we did of, carving out percentages of time to be spent living in the two different worlds has become harder and harder since COVID. Have you guys found any tricks for making the 10%? Because I'll say, I'll talk about 10%. Everybody will laugh and go, yeah, we've been trying that for years. Have you guys found any tricks that you'd offer to SPCs for making the 10% stick or,
Make it visible. Just visualize that you really reserve that time and bring it on the table and talk about it. And what I've learned this week talking to leaders again is their aha moment. This is a duty on our side to lead that change, to lead how you deal with the tension between the hierarchy, the primary organization, which is the line organization, and how we deal with change, right? And I think if that's my trick, if it's a trick, asking the change agents to ask the right questions again to leaders and surface it to where it belongs and how they should deal with it, right? Ali?
If I may, I had the lucky opportunity to formalize something like this real hard. And how did we do that? This was an organization that uses SAP for time writing. We've managed to create a WBS, which is a code that you use to write your time on. For it, everybody hates time writing, But nonetheless, that was the reality over there. So time writing had to happen until we have a new organization-wide other tool standard. We managed to create a WBS for we call that process improvement. So that meant that the line management had a budget on which people could spend their time on process improvement, which was
Perfect.
basically it wasn't just processes, but it was also ways to collaborate. It was things like hackathons where all of a sudden could be organized without anyone, project leads or budget holders being like, hey, wait a second, you're hosting hackathons and, fun and games on my budget. Because that didn't happen anymore.
Yes.
Because, everyone spent the time which was budgeted for process improvement, which was perfect for line management because they had a new way to standardize is not the right word, but to govern, even protect competence development, and be able to write that in a very formal way. So because there's indeed always the fight of, how much capacity can we spend on enablers? And then at the end of the quarter, you'll see that all of those enablers have been carefully sort of pushed aside to
Yes.
make room for all of the other more visible project stuff. And so by making this extremely hard in the sense of line management had a budget and a WBS, or a time writing code, for specifically these things, it worked beautifully because the fluffy semi-handshake approach, it just, in moments of stress and chaos and priorities and escalations, these kind of things are being moved away.
Nice.
I love it. But guys, we have the weekly challenge of Niko's jiggles. Assuming the dual operating system or model was a children's fairy tale, which one would it be? And because you challenged us, Niko, you're the first to go.
I had the biggest challenge myself, as usually. I thought if I look at every fairy tale that Disney makes a movie out of it, it really changes the character of the fairy tale. So if you go to Grimm's fairy tales, you always have evil has to die. Really, it has to die because it's evil and it deserves. So if you go to the Seven Goats history, the wolf dies with stones in the stomach. You always, the evil has to die in Grimm's. And in Disney fairy tales, you always have a happy end. And sometimes the dual operating model seems like a happy end. It doesn't have to die. Don't take me wrong, but I don't want to have these happy endings, and that's why it's every Disney movie that is based on a Grimm's fairy tale. That's in my case the fairy tale that symbolizes the dual operating system. Please, no happy ends.
Ali, your fairy
Yes.
tale.
Dual operating system. I was thinking about two sides, two things that somehow need to collaborate, and I ended up with the tortoise and the hare.
Oh, cool.
Because on the one hand you had speed and consistency, and on the other one, on the one hand you had speed, and the other one you had consistency, sort of determination, discipline.
Mm.
And the thing is, in order to get far, you need to need both. So that's what I got.
Interesting. I choose the goose that laid golden eggs. And the farmer was a dumb farmer. He killed the goose to get more golden eggs out of it at once, right? So for me, it's between nurturing the goose, don't kill it, as long as it lives, and this balance between short-term wins, long-term wins. And again, that leads back to, hey, let's have smart leadership. And it adheres, or it pays into what you said, Mark, right? Capabilities of leadership. If you detect them, that they are there, use them. If they are not there, please invest, right? Because leadership is crucial to deal with the challenge we have. Mark.
Well, ChatGPT was, as usual, very helpful to me in responding to Niko. So I've wound up with Rumpelstiltskin. And if it's been a long time since you're a kid and you've forgotten Rumpelstiltskin, the very short version is there was a miller who boasted about his daughter's ability to weave. And the king heard, and the king demanded that she weave impossible things, or there was going to be a horrendous punishment. And she was panicking, and Rumpelstiltskin, this little imp, comes along to her and says he can help her do it, but she's going to owe him in the future. And she's caught between responding to the king's demand and between knowing that there'll be a price to pay in the future to the imp, and that there's no right choice for her. And of course, they figured out a happy ending to it in the long run there. But I think for me, for a lot of people living in this world, they can feel like they're very much torn between two masters. And, if you're very people-centric, right, how do you create a world where people don't feel that?
Interesting. Thank you very much. Dual operating model talks about hierarchy, the robustness. It should be stable. It talks about the network. There's a lot of collaboration. And let me steer our attention back to how do we kind of, like in a body, install a system of neurology, how you steer, how you communicate, how you make it work, because a little bit of anatomy, it's just bones and flesh, right? A little bit of process is physiology. Yes, blood is running through this body, but there's much, much more. And what does that mean for us when it comes to the dual operating model? Ali, would you kick it off?
Yes, and I'll try to keep it short because I'm very, very, very much hoping that people are going to read a book that I'm going to refer to, which is a book from Yves Morieux. He was a consultant or partner at one of those big consulting firms, but he wrote a book called The 6 Simple Rules. The 6 Simple Rules. And it is really about simplification in a world of what he calls complicatedness. We'd like to take that away. And in that book, he obviously describes 6 rules. And one of them is the rule of what we call management in a world of complicatedness. That includes, and that's how I sort of perceive it, the world that is existing in the web that has been casted between the two operating models. And in that book, he describes that the manager should be like a people's connector, a person who has the responsibility to connect people from a more, let's say, informal side, in the sense of making sure that we learn from each other, and from a more, let's say, technical side, so that whomever is building something is going to talk and communicate and interface with somebody else who's building something else. That's why he also calls them that these managers are integrators. Their job is actually to integrate the different departments, to identify boundaries and try to work around them. And I think that resonated so well in let's say the how to perceive the dual operating system, that I thought, rather than trying to explain all of the tricks that he describes in that book, I'll just refer to that book.
Interesting. And you brought up this keyword integrator, and it calls for leadership, right? So I highly second that. Leadership is crucial. We just talked about it, and we will come back to leadership again, because I want to know from you guys what you think is, if you can do something magically, what you would do. But before we do that, let's stick with, when it comes to steering, when it comes to, and I would throw in the word control as well, because in German, Kontrolle has a bad connotation. But to control something is something really helpful for an organization. And you brought up this keyword integrator, and I see another picture arising. Mark.
I must confess I haven't read that book, Ali, but I just bookmarked it. I think the first thing for me is you've got to deal with the mum and dad situation, right? And this is both communication and decision making. And by the mum and dad situation, like anybody who's had a kid knows this system, that you have to promise to back each other up, right? When one parent makes a call, the other one has to back them up. And your kids very rapidly figure out who's likely to give them the answer they want to hear.
Right.
Right. And they know that if they can get a call made that is the one they want, then the other parent's going to have to back it up because they know the rule. And as parents, you've got to become hypersensitive to recognizing when the moment is, I'm going to have to talk to your mother about that first, or have you talk to your mother, and not letting them get you trapped, right? And knowing when you're in that dangerous territory and having the right level of communication between each other as parents to actually be consistent with the calls and to check in when you need to check in. You know, it's probably tried to parallel this, but I think if you think about a world of multiple leaders and the need for you to have that same ability to have each other's back, but also to have the sensitivity to be thinking about, oh, is this a call I need to check in on before I make it? Super important. And I think the second one for me, again, in both decision-making and communications, is a little bit like back to Ali's WBS, right? Build deliberate protocols. It's wonderful to go, the people will make the right decision and just have the right people in the room and magic will happen. But you've got to build the capability for that. You've got to build the capability of knowing who the right people are to have in the room for a given conversation. And some people will find it more naturally than others. So getting in there and building the product, like if you'd told me in my early agile years that I would have ever think running a RACI workshop was a good idea, I would have laughed so hard, right? Because RACI was almost like a swear word to me in my early agile days. I can't tell you how many role clarity workshops I've run just because people want to get the conversation in to go, we know where the boundaries sit and we know the systems. Yes, you want them to evolve. You don't want them to be stuck in stone, but you do want that extra level of clarity and formality to help you build the habits.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's unfair. It's just unfair.
Yeah.
So we just, let people
Exactly.
loose in this new world, and people might not be, educated enough in this new way of working. It's just unfair to be like, the rest of the world is working in a completely different way, and you just try to figure it out.
I've worked with a couple of clients, one in particular, who took all of the network ideals too far and almost abolished the hierarchy. They were really unhappy places to work because everybody was empowered and nobody could make a decision.
Something just
Too
inspired
much
me,
democracy.
Mark. While I listened to Mark, I had a question for the audience. This mommy daddy principle. How many times you as a coach said, "Oh, I would have said yes, but let's ask management first." So we laughed about the story, but we're doing this all the time, saying, "Oh, as an agile coach, as a scrum master, as a product owner, as a PM, I would have said yes, but let's ask evil management first." So like me saying, "Oh, I'm fun daddy, I say yes, but let's ask mommy because her votes count." But I would have said yes, but she has to do the call, and it's not fair. It's really, if you let's say, take the question with me. Let's discuss it with the people, with all the people, including me, who are responsible, and give you the answer instead of I would have said yes. And question to you, dear SPCs, how many times you just blamed management and said, "Yeah, I would have said yes." Thanks, Mark.
Besides all the good tips and tricks and hints that we talked about, let's bring in some magic again. And with the magic, let's try to focus on perhaps one or two things that you would use as a magic wand. If you could use it, where would you use it and how would you use it to best leverage effect that you have an organization that masters the dual operating model, being consistent, being proficient, and also being adaptive to innovation?
I think in my case, I would just want to have more courage in the people. I don't know if it's a Swiss thing or a culture thing we're having here. It's always backing up, having perfect plans, always try to understand what dual operating system is exactly, what this is exactly, how could an art slicing thing look perfectly or has less risks. I understand sometimes you don't want to go blindly and somewhere, but between blindly and having a perfect plan, which is never possible because the world is spinning too fast, I would love to have more courage. So people saying, let's try it out. And we will not lose a leg or whatever, maybe a scratch, but we can heal afterwards. And that's what I would like to magically have more courage on several levels, not only on management level.
I'm looking over to Mark.
All right. Okay, I'll take the cue. For me, it's about as early as you can in your journey, getting your HR people involved, right? If you're a change agent, you're an SPC, you're a coach, get HR in, because I'll almost guarantee that they've forgotten more about the way operating systems work than you will ever learn. And you need that brain, you know. I, as a coach, I come from a product development background. I was a software engineer and I've studied agile and lean, right? I never went and studied HR. I've learned about it by osmosis to an extent. I've learned a lot about it by coaching people from an HR background. So get them involved early. And apart from anything else, like even a little thing, and my favorite example on this front is how to find somebody, right? If you're in a big organization, how do you find where someone lives? You get the name of somebody and you go, I wonder who that is. And you look them up, and what we do over here, and I assume it's similar for you guys in Europe, you look them up in Outlook and you go, who do they report to and who are their peers and who reports to them? And that's why you figure out where they live in the organization. And you got a clue who you're about to go and talk to. But guess what? What you just got was the hierarchy view of the world, right? You don't know what team or art they're part of. You don't know what value stream they belong to. And which conversation are you trying to have with them? But if you get your HR people involved, they will say, oh, there's ways of doing that, right? If you look at, let's say, Workday, which is one of the very common popular HR systems these days, Workday enables you to have dual reporting lines. And, you know, a simple thing like that of being able to go, the systems, the HR systems of the organization can recognize your home and people can find out where you live through the infrastructure of the world. That's awesome, right? Now, I'll tell you now, with all my agile and lean background, I never ever would have thought of that answer until an HR person went, oh yeah, we can do that.
I can second that, Mark. I learned a lot this week talking to HR people, talking to architects who have ingenious pictures of landscape. Where are people working? What are they working on from a technical viewpoint? I talked to leaders. And the interesting thing was during coffee breaks with leaders, your system, no matter what it is, if it's an operating system, if it's a future system, there's two ways you can get there or you can operate it. Either magically something happens, but that's not steering the stuff, or you as a leader, you understand what's happening and you start steering. And the question was, Niko, in some of these discussions, does change management or this second part of the coin disappear at the given time? No, it doesn't. It's always two sides of the coins. Means leadership is constantly involved. And this aha moment this week in discussions with leaders, hey, we can steer, but if we don't, perhaps some stuff will happen we can't control. And I asked them as well, okay, always ask yourself the question, what would happen in the organization if I'm away on a 6-month sabbatical? Are we still successful? Why does it need me? Or is something missing if I'm away, right? And that's interesting to see that leaders then go into this mode of leading change, starting mastering the dual operating model. No matter how you design it, how you operate it, but you have to operate, otherwise something happens that you can't control. Let's finalize. The famous just one key takeaway. The race is on. Who would like to start?
I'm going to start. Don't try to kill your hierarchy. You'll regret it.
Nice. I think I have something very similar, which is that we please, pretty please, with cherry on top, should move a little bit away from the lovey-dovey agile story about mindset and teamwork and doing and being mindset and caring for each other. All of that is correct. However, on this topic, this is about early clarification of roles, responsibilities, adjusting control processes, and ultimately people's careers. So be careful with this.
And from my side, the dual operating system is not the goal. It's maybe a starting point, but not the goal.
And I picked up a Willie Nelson song, Don't Break Your Eggs to Count Your Chickens. Keep it a living system that really produces value. And with that, talking stick back to Mark.
All right. Thank you, Stephan. Well, this was a very don't be too fluffy week. After we've done a few episodes talking about coaching and facilitation, which of course is all about fluffy. Well, it's kind of all about fluffy. We're going back next week because it feels like, we just love facilitation and coaching too much. And next week, we are going to talk about our favorite tools for remote facilitation. What are the tricks and tools we found to make for richer experiences and give us more freedom to focus on what's happening in the room. So look forward to lots of URLs, links, screenshots, and other things of the tools that we've found to help us facilitating great remote events. In the meantime, thanks for joining.
Adios.